My name is Staff Sergeant Nathan Mercer, United States Army, attached in the summer of 1987 to a classified recovery and containment detail operating out of White Sands, New Mexico. I signed papers that erased the assignment before I even reached the desert. I was told I would be guarding a weapons transfer through a restricted geological test site. That was the first lie. The second lie was that we were going down to rescue trapped personnel. The truth was waiting under the gypsum flats, under the missile ranges, under the dry, cracked earth that gave off heat all day and then turned cold as metal after sunset. It had been there before the first bomb tests, before the first survey stake, before the Army poured concrete over a wound it did not understand. You can always tell when men are escorting something they fear more than death. They stop talking. They stop joking. Every buckle is checked twice. Every magazine is touched again and again like prayer beads. That was the mood inside our convoy when we rolled west from White Sands after dark. There were 9 of us in my section. Lieutenant Harris Cole, my immediate officer, 29, sharp jaw, West Point, the kind of man who ironed even field collars. Sergeant Eli Vance, my second, calm enough to slow your pulse by standing near you. Specialist Jonah Avery, our radio man, brilliant with electronics, weak stomach, never admitted either. Corporal Luis Ramirez, machine gunner, New Mexico native, always listening to the desert like it was talking back. Private Daniel Sue, youngest in the unit, eager, disciplined, still carrying that clean, unbroken faith recruits bring from home. Doc Morrow, our medic, older than the rest of us by 10 years, hands steady under shelling. Keller and Boone, combat engineers. Then me, good men. I say their names because official paper no longer does. We drove for nearly 2 hours without headlights, following stake lamps hooded in red. The land flattened into a black plain. Far off, the Oscura Mountains sat against the sky like buried teeth. The air smelled of dust, hot rubber, and creosote cooling after the sun. Somewhere to our south, lightning flashed inside a cloud bank without thunder, the light trapped and silent like something alive trying to get out. Ramirez leaned toward my window and said, "You noticed the markers?" I had. Every half-mile, a steel post had been sunk beside the road. Each one carried the same scratch symbol at shoulder height, 3 vertical lines. Not painted. Cut in. Keller joked that maybe it marked survey sectors. Nobody answered him. At 22:30, we reached the facility. From a distance, it looked temporary, almost forgettable. A few low concrete service buildings, chain-link fencing, sodium lamps, a motor pool, 1 broad corrugated hangar. But there were too many layers of security for any routine site. Army at the outer gate, Department of Energy badges at the second, men in desert camouflage with no insignia at the third. No flags, no bay signs, no casual movement. Inside the hangar was a shaft. That is, when the smell changed. The desert has its own clean dryness, like heated stone and powdered salt. The air rising from the shaft smelled wet and mineral, touched with ozone and something else I did not recognize but would never forget after. Cold metal, old blood, like copper pennies left in rainwater and sealed in a tomb. Lieutenant Cole received a briefing from a pale civilian administrator named Arden Rowe, and a woman introduced only as Dr. Helen Ward. Rowe spoke like a man rehearsing a sentence he had said too many times to believe it anymore. Subterranean power disruption. Containment personnel non-responsive. Your team secures surviving staff, restores generator priority, and assists evacuation. Cole asked the sensible question. Containment of what? Rowe looked at Dr. Ward. She did not blink. Biological assets, she said. Human? A pause. No. Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes. In normal circumstances, that single word would have broken the tension with disbelief. Down there, standing over that black hole, breathing cold into our faces, it only made the silence heavier. We checked weapons, masks, lamps, spare batteries. Avery tested comms. Vance adjusted Sue's harness because the kid's fingers were shaking too much to thread the buckle right. Doc Morrow handed out sealed ampoules of atropine and said, "If I tell you to take one, you take it. No questions." Gas. Boone asked. "Maybe not," Morrow said. That answer stayed with me. The elevator was a steel cage large enough for a truck, suspended on twin cables that vanished into darkness. I stepped in third, boots ringing on the grated floor. As soon as the gate clanged shut behind us, the night above felt distant, already historical, like something seen through dirty glass. The descent took too long. At first, all we heard was the rattle of rollers and the low groan of cable under strain. The lights mounted to the cage cast us in a sick yellow halo while the shaft walls slid past in layers of poured concrete, then raw stone, then something darker and smoother than either. Moisture shone on the walls in silver threads. The air got colder with every yard. Halfway down, Sue lifted his head. "Sergeant," he whispered, "did you hear that?" We all did. 3 slow knocks. Not from below. Not from above. From somewhere inside the shaft wall itself. Close enough that I felt the vibration to the rail under my hand. Knock, knock, knock. The cage operator, one of Rose's men, stared straight ahead and pretended nothing had happened. Ramirez spat over the side and muttered in Spanish under his breath. Vance's eyes met mine. He had the same thought I did. That was not shifting rock. The doors open onto level 3 at 2241. We stepped into a corridor lined with concrete and old ceramic tile, lit by dim red emergency strips. Water dripped somewhere in the distance with maddening regularity. The place looked half. Military bunker, half hospital, and half mine shaft, which should be impossible, but is the closest honest description I can give. Equipment from different decades sat side by side. New generators wired into rusting switchboards. Fresh fluorescent signage above doors, set into walls that seemed far older than the Army. Every surface had condensation on it, though the air was not warm enough to produce it. Our radio check to the surface came back thin and crackling. Surface. This is Bravo's section. On level 3, commencing movement. Static. Then faintly, copy, restore local, avoid lower ring until... The transmission cut off in a hiss. Cole gave hand signals, and we moved. The first body was at the security station 50 yards in. Male, civilian, early 40s. He had no visible wounds. He sat slumped against a console with his chin on his chest, and both hands crushed hard over his ears, fingers broken backward from pressure. There was dried blood under his nose, and a trickle from each ear canal. Doc Morrow checked him, then looked up at me. Not recent. 6 hours, maybe more. Keller pointed his lamp at the wall behind the desk. 3 vertical lines had been scratched into the paint over and over until the gypsum board showed through. Boone said, too casually, somebody got bored. No one answered. We found more signs as we advanced. A dropped clipboard beside an open blast door. 2 rifles on the floor with full magazines. A coffee mug shattered on tile, liquid still tacky. A sealed lab with thick observation glass, rimed in frost from the inside. There were smears on the glass at human shoulder height. Long hand-shaped streaks, as if something would try to climb through. Level maps hung at each intersection. The complex was arranged in concentric rings around a deeper central shaft. Administrative stations on 3. Research and storage on 4. Containment on 5 and 6. The lowest section below those had no label. Just a black circle on the map with a line through it and a handwritten note in greased pencil. Do not answer knocking. Sue read it out loud before I could stop him. As soon as the words left his mouth, the lights overhead dimmed for 1 long second. Avery whispered, I hate that. We reached the monitoring chamber at 2304. I can still see it clearly. Semicircular room. Banks of dead consoles. Rolling chairs overturned. The sharp smell of burnt insulation mixed with antiseptic. A wide glass observation, wall looking down into a lower hall lined with cell doors. Half the monitors were dead. The rest showed frozen or flickering camera feeds. Black corridors, security checkpoints. 1 overturned gurney. 1 empty wheelchair spinning slowly in place as if nudged by an unseen hand. Then 1 live feed stabilized. A figure stood at the far end of cell corridor 6. Human height, naked head, arms at sides. Cole leaned toward the screen. Can you zoom? Avery worked the console. Static crawled across the picture, then cleared. It was Security Captain Rena Solis. Except 5 minutes later, we found Captain Solis dead in the infirmary, with both eyes open and her chest collapsed inward, as if something had gripped her ribs and squeezed. On the monitor, she lifted one pale hand and tapped the wall beside her 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. The image failed. Cole turned on Dr. Ward. She had followed us down with 2 technicians and had stayed quiet until then, hugging a clipboard to her chest like armor. Tell me exactly what we're dealing with. Her face looked gray in the emergency light. Adaptive prisoners, she said. That means nothing. It means they learn. It means they imitate. It means you must not trust voice recognition, visual confirmation, or familiar emotional stimuli. Ramirez frowned. English? She looked at each of us one by one before answering. They will look and sound like people you know if that helps them get close. Nobody said a word after that. Dr. Ward accessed a locked file at the console. The screen filled with text and old military headers. Recovered biologicals. Remote holding array. Behavioral mimicry. Post-Roswell live captures. Transferred underground retention site, 1948. Roswell. The room changed after that. Not physically. In our heads. You can dismiss rumors. You cannot dismiss a declassified header staring back at you in Army format. Avery gave a strained laugh that died immediately. You are telling me the government kept aliens in a hole under New Mexico for 40 years. Ward answered with complete exhaustion. I am telling you this hole was already here. We only inherited it. The backup generators failed at 2311. Darkness crashed down, so suddenly several men swore by reflex. Helmet lamps snapped on in jerking white beams. Every shadow looked occupied. Something hit the observation glass from the other side with a muted impact. Then again. 3 circles of stress fractured outward in the frosted pane at chest level. Knock, knock, knock. Sue stumbled back into me hard enough to rattle my teeth. I swept my light across the glass and finally saw one clearly. It was standing inches beyond the frost. The body had roughly human proportions only because that shape was useful in a corridor. The limbs were too long between joints. The elbows seemed doubled, giving the forearms an extra hinge. The skin was pale and almost translucent, stretched over moving cords beneath as if the musculature kept reorganizing itself. Its face was wrong in the ways nightmares are wrong. 2 vertical eyes set too deep and too narrow. A flat nose split at the bridge by a thin seam that opened and closed once like a gill. The mouth was a crosshatch of fine lines rather than lips, for diagonal cuts meeting at the center. It pressed one hand to glass. 5 fingers, then 6. A narrow extra digit unfolded from the palm like a hidden blade. Vance fired once without asking permission. The round struck the glass and ricocheted. The thing behind the pane did not flinch. It leaned closer, and every radio on our gear spoke in Captain Solis's voice. Open the door. Sue yelped and tore his headset off. The voice kept coming from the shoulder speaker on his rig. Open the door. Cole snapped orders, pulled us back into the corridor, and had Keller dog the monitoring room, blast door shut. The instant the wheel locked, something hit the far side with violent force that bowed the metal inward by half an inch. Not random. Rhythmic. 3 blows. Pause. 3 blows. Pause. Generator room. Cole said, "Move." We advanced toward the auxiliary plant, while Avery tried to reestablish surface comms, and got only static woven with whispers too low to parse. Twice, he said somebody was murmuring beneath the signal. Twice I told him to ignore it. The first attack came outside cold storage B. A ceiling grate burst downward. Something pale and fast unfolded out of vent and landed on Ramirez before I could bring my rifle up. It hit him high, all upper limbs, moving with obscene precision. One set of arms hooked his weapon. Another clamped his shoulders. A smaller pair folded around the back of his helmet, like a blindfold. Ramirez did not even get a full scream out before the creature pressed his faceplate against his. Listening. That is the only word for what it did. It did not bite. It listened at him. It was searching him the way a burglar searches pockets. Then Ramirez's own voice came over his chest mic, perfectly calm. "Friendly here. Do not fire." For half a second, Sue hesitated. Vance did not. He drove 3 rounds through Ramirez, and the thing attached him in a tight upward line. The creature jerked, peeled away, landed spider-like on the wall, and ran along it parallel to the floor with 4 limbs while the other 2 hung loose and dripping. Its head turned all the way around to keep watching us. Then it leaped again. Boone hit it midair with a shotgun blast that tore open its side. Cold black fluid sprayed the corridor and smoked where it touched hot brass. The smell was sharp enough to sting the eyes, like battery acid cut with seawater. The thing folded in on itself, not dead, not even close, until Keller emptied half a magazine into its skull. Ramirez died at my knees, making wet choking sounds that still wake me up some nights. Doc Morrow tried. There was nothing to try. Avery vomited against the wall, then wiped his mouth and got back on the radio, because good men continue when their minds want to break. Cole knelt beside the dead creature. Its body kept twitching in small corrective motions. The fingers tapped the tile weakly in a steady pattern. Knock, knock, knock. Do not let them touch your face, Ward said. Her voice shook now. Once they establish a complete auditory and emotional read, the mimicry improves. Cole stared at her. You knew that, and you still sent us in blind? I was sent too. He almost struck her then. I saw it in his shoulder. He mastered it because officers are trained to postpone rage until paperwork. Under that ground, paperwork meant nothing. We left Ramirez where he fell because there was no way to carry him and stay operational. That sentence is easy to write and impossible to live with. By 23:35, the distortion had started. That is the term the debriefed doctors use later. Distortion. As if the senses had simply gone fuzzy. That is too gentle a word. The air itself seemed to learn us. At one corner I smelled my grandfather's machine shop, hot grease and cedar shavings, though he had been buried since 1978. Sue claimed sunlight was shining under a blast door that clearly opened into an internal hall. Avery heard a baseball game faintly under the static on the command channel. Keller swore his wedding ring kept turning on his finger by itself every time the knocking began. The auxiliary generator room was partly flooded and almost dark. Boone and Keller got the housings open while Avery traced the surviving comm line. Doc Morrow sedated Sue after he started insisting there were children knocking from inside a sealed supply locker. Cole ordered me to inventory the room. That was how I found the printer. It sat on a side desk, powered down, spooled with a half-roll of paper. The moment Boone restored current to the local circuit, the printer woke and began feeding pages at high speed. None of us had touched it. Avery tore off the first sheet and handed it to me. It was a transcript. Interview 12. Subject response mode. Mirror. Prompt. What do you want? Answer. To leave the shadow. Prompt. What is the shadow? Answer. The thing below US. Prompt. Why do you imitate US? Answer. So you keep the door shut. The paper kept coming. Prompt. Who built this place? Answer. Those who ran. Prompt. From what? Answer. What is waiting under the last door? Prompt. Why do you knock? Answer. To warn the listener. The next line printed halfway and jammed. Prompt. What happens if a blood-red hand slammed against the little window in the generator room door? Every man spun toward it. The face behind the glass was Boone's. Real Boone was beside me holding a wrench. The false Boone smiled with perfect human familiarity and lifted a hand. Knock, knock, knock. Then the reinforced door bulged inward as 3 more impacts struck from the other side. Cole did not hesitate. Maintenance passage. Move. We fell back through a side corridor as the generator room door began to peel from its frame. Keller hit the emergency foam suppressant on the way out, flooding the chamber in white vapor. A shape rushed through the foam wearing Boone's silhouette for 2 steps before lengthening upward into something boneless and wrong. The maintenance passage sloped down instead of up. At first, I thought it was a trick of the floor. Then my stomach told me the truth. Every emergency route in that section had been designed for containment, not evacuation. They all fed toward a deeper hub where older systems converged. Cole understood it at the same moment I did. His expression changed from anger to pure, cold realization. We were never meant to extract if the power went. Dr. Ward said nothing. Her silence confirmed it. The passage ended at a boundary the Army had simply built against rather than altered. Concrete gave way to a black stone threshold without tool marks or seams. The old structure beyond did not look carved so much as grown into shape. Smooth walls curved at angles the eye disliked. Our lamps reflected back in dim, stretched blurs that seemed to lag behind our movement. The temperature dropped hard. My breath fogged inside my mask. The air carried that same copper-wet smell, stronger now, but under was another note, something like old paper soaked in brine, a library at the bottom of the sea. I know how absurd that sounds. It is still the nearest comparison I have. There were alcoves along the descent, each sealed by a dark membrane thin, as oil and hard as steel. In some I glimpsed empty spaces the size of coffins. In others, shapes waited behind the surface with limbs folded close, heads tilted as if listening through the barrier. Avery whispered, "Cells?" Ward nodded. "Dormant chambers." "For them?" he asked. She hesitated a second too long. "Not all of them." We reached the lower ring at 2359. Imagine a cathedral built by miners for something they feared, then buried, then rediscovered and wired for electricity. That gets you close. The chamber was enormous, circular, and supported by columns covered in scratches that resembled writing until you looked directly at them. The center held a raised platform wrapped in Army hardware, cables, scaffolds, and generator spines bolted onto an ancient ring of black metal, surrounding a shaft that dropped into darkness deeper than our lamps could measure. Bodies ringed the platform. Not one era, several. 1940s uniforms gone to dust. Vietnam-era gear. Modern lab coats. Security armor. Men and women from different decades arranged by death in the same posture. Backs bent, heads low, hands clamped over their ears. A warding gesture. Ward moved to the platform like someone sleepwalking. "This is the root array." Cole grabbed her arm. "Speak plainly." She looked at the shaft. The biologicals on 5 and 6 were not the primary concern. They were captives. Mimetic scavengers. Dangerous, yes, but containable. This place was built for what is beneath them. Nobody spoke. From the shaft came a low sound, almost below hearing. Not a voice, not machinery. More like the pressure wave that precedes a distant explosion. Except it went on, steady enough to sink into the bones. My teeth vibrated. Then the knocking started around us again. This time it came from everywhere. Columns, floor plates, the undersides of old helmets. Inside the walls, 3 slow knocks repeated in overlapping patterns until the whole chamber seemed to breathe in that rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Figures stepped out from behind the columns. Not one, not 2, at least a dozen. Some wore partial human form. Some had given up the effort and moved in their own efficient shapes. One came toward us using 4 limbs and 2 trailing arms held close like folded antennae. Another stood upright in Lieutenant Cole's exact height and bearing, complete down to the way he carried his chin when issuing orders. A third had copied Doc Morrow but made the legs subtly backward from a knee. They were not charging. They were herding. One of them, wearing the face of Captain Solis, spoke in a calm female voice that echoed slightly from too many throats at once. "Do not wake the thing below." Cole aimed center mass. "Then help us shut it down." Solis smiled with mouth that split wider than human anatomy allows. "We have been trying for a very long time." Ward whispered. "They learned language by listening to the guards. We assumed deception was their weapon. We may have misunderstood motive." Vance never lowered his rifle. "You wanted to trust the thing imitating a dead officer." "No," the false Solis said. "I want you to run." Something moved below the platform. The shaft exhaled. A gust of air came up so cold it burned through cloth. The smell was not copper anymore. It was open grave soil after rain, old stone split open, and beneath it a faint sweetness like flowers left too long in a sealed room. The creatures around us recoiled. That is what I remember most clearly. Fear in them. Genuine animal absolute. The mimic, wearing Cole's outline, put both hands over his own ears and backed away from the shaft. Another dropped to all fours and began tapping frantically at the floor in a far faster sequence than before, as if sounding an alarm. Ward broke loose from Cole and climbed onto the platform. The lower seals are failing. The field collapse woke it. If the central lock opens fully, whatever built this prison lost to it once. Cole shouted, "Can you re-engage the lock? I can overload the Army additions and trigger the original mechanism for a few minutes. Maybe. She met his eyes. Nobody tested this and survived. There are moments in combat when hierarchy survives fear and moments when it dissolves because reality has outrun procedure. Cole looked at the platform, the mimics, the shaft, the dead, then made the right call. Keller, Boone, charges on the modern emitter spine. Mercer, Vance, perimeter. Avery stays on comms. Morrow with Sue. We blow the Army hardware after Ward cycles the O-lock. We bury this level if we can. The creatures came in before we finished placing the charges. Not in a screaming rush. In a coordinated wave. One group sprinted for the side corridors as if to cut off retreat. Another moved low across the floor toward Keller and Boone, who were wiring breaching packs to the field couplers. Two upright forms advanced straight at Cole and me, one wearing Ramirez's face intact and smiling, the other a faceless pale version of Sue with vertical eyes opening where it should have been. Avery opened fire first. His rounds tore chunks from the false Ramirez, but it kept coming, speaking in Luis's exact voice. "Mercer, behind you." I nearly turned. That is how close it came. Vance dropped it with a burst to the collarbone that snapped the borrowed head sideways. Black fluid sprayed the ancient stone and hissed like sleet on hot metal. Another mimic hit Doc Morrow, not from the front but from below the platform lip where it had been folded into shadow. It rapped him chest back and forced his face against his cheek. Morrow screamed one raw syllable. Then his own voice came over the radio, gentle and steady. "I'm all right." He was not. I turned and fired at arm's length. The rounds punched through both bodies. The mimic released him, but not before something changed in Morrow's eyes. He looked at me with desperate recognition for 1 second, then with nothing I knew for the next. He staggered backward, clutching his face, and walked straight into shaft without a sound. His scream did not begin until he was already out of sight. Sue broke. He tore off his headset and started shouting that his sister was calling him from inside the wall. There were no walls near him, only columns and open dark. A small white shape rushed him from the floor between two bodies. Sue fired wild, slipped on blood, and the thing climbed him like a ladder. Its fingers slid under the edge of his faceplate, and his shout turned into a bubbling shriek. Cole shot both of them together. The chamber became muzzle flash and echo. Avery was dragged under a cable spool by something with too many elbows. His radio remained on even after he vanished, filling the net with static, then breath. Then a baseball announcer calmly describing a game from 20 years earlier. Boone went down beside the emitter spine when a mimic wearing his own face reached out from the smoke and touched his helmet as gently as a brother. Boone froze just long enough for another one to open from throat to belly. Keller kept wiring charges with blood pumping from a shoulder wound, lips moving in some private prayer. Ramirez's body, dead on level 3, impossible, unmistakable, staggered into the chamber with half his cheek gone and both hands spread in appeal. Vance emptied a magazine into it and still advanced until Ward screamed, "Head and spine both, or they reconfigure." Cole adapted instantly, calling targets, placing men, keeping order in hell with the voice of a parade ground instructor. That is why his death stayed with me hardest. He saw Keller finish the last charge. He saw a path open to the stair. He turned to cover our withdrawal. The mimic that killed him came wearing my face. Not close. Perfect. Same helmet scuff. Same jawline. Same eyes. It came out of the smoke to Cole's left and said, in my exact voice, "Sir, this way." He glanced toward it because disciplined men respond in known voices. That fraction of a second was enough. Its lower arms punched through the side gaps in his armor. The upper pair clamped his head. I heard the crack even over the gunfire. Cole folded without ever pulling the trigger. Vance shot the thing off him and stared at me only long enough to confirm I was still standing. No accusation, only the awful knowledge that whatever studied us could wear us back to one another. Ward reached the old lever assembly at the platform center. The black ring around the shaft was engraved with lines so fine They seemed like cracks until light hit them, and they lit from within. White fire ran around the circle. Symbols bloomed across the floor, not projected, not electric, but surfacing from the stone itself as if the chamber had remembered its purpose. Every mimic shrieked. That sound was nothing like their stolen voices. It was layered, metallic, and wet, like a choir made of broken instruments. Several dropped to the floor and covered their heads. Others ran directly away from the shaft in blind panic. The thing below answered. The entire chamber flexed under us. Dust sifted from the high dark above. The shaft emitted one immense pulse of force that struck my chest and blurred my vision. For a single second my lamp illuminated something rising inside that depth, not a body in any human sense. A black vertical mass larger than the shaft it contained. Its surface neither flesh nor stone, but something in between, banded with pale impressions that looked horribly like giant fingertips pressing outward from within. Ward screamed over the rising howl. Now! Blow the modern lock. Keller slapped the detonator into my hand. I hit it. The army-built emitter spine, cables, scaffold, and bracing rings vanished in a chain of concussions. White light punched through the chamber. The floor bucked. Ancient stone cracked with gunshot reports. The blast waved through me onto my back and snuffed my lamp. For a moment there was no up or down, only dust, pressure, and the taste of blood in my mouth. When I came to, Vance was hauling me by the collar. Move! Ward was still on the platform. She had jammed both hands into the old lever assembly to keep it locked in place, while arcs of white energy crawled over her sleeves. Her eyes found mine through the dust. Not pleading, not afraid, simply resolved. Then something vast struck the shaft from below. The ancient ring shattered. Ward disappeared in the burst. Vance and I ran. No heroics, no formation. Two men stumbling through ruin while the chamber behind us tore itself apart. Keller limped ahead, clutching a remote charge clacker, trying to reach the upper stair, so he could drop the final supports. Mimics, burned and misshapen now, still came to the dust in coordinated pursuit. One ran along the ceiling upside down and dropped onto Keller's back. They went down together. Keller shoved the clacker toward me as the creature's hands opened his throat. I caught it and kept moving because stopping there meant joining him. That sentence shames me, but it
is true. The stair to level 3 was half collapsed. Vance shoved me upward and turned to fire down the steps. In the muzzle flash, I saw shapes climbing over one another, no longer bothering with human outlines. Their limbs unfolded longer, faster, cleaner. They had stopped pretending because time for pretending was over. We reached level 3 to find it in total failure. Sprinklers blasted cold water through red rotating alarm light. Smoke drifted low over the floor. Doors slammed open and shut on failing hydraulics. Emergency messages looped over the speakers and a woman's voice that kept glitching into male tones and child tones halfway through each sentence. A body lay outside infirmary. Captain Solis. No, not the body. The skin. Whatever had worn her had left it there like a uniform dropped after shift. Vance saw it and said very softly, "Do not look too long." The lift shaft was dead, no power, no cage. Avery's earlier notes came back to me through the haze. Freight incline on the west ramp, emergency tram. Manual override. We pushed for it. On the way, Sue's voice came over the radio, clear and frightened. "Sergeant, I'm alive. Supply room. Please." Vance ripped the headset off my shoulder and threw it into flooding water without breaking stride. "Not him," he said. We reached the incline bay at 0048. The tram sat on its rail, cradle angled steeply up toward the surface. Two flat carts linked behind a motor sled. One dead operator slumped in the chair, with both eardrums burst. Above us, through the long ramp tunnel, I could just make out a distant square of night. Home looked like a postage stamp. I got the motor running. Vance climbed onto the rear cart to cover the tunnel. Behind us, the bay doors shuddered under impact. 3 blows. Pause. 3 blows. Knock. 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 The tram started up. Steel wheels shrieked. Water and blood streamed off the rails behind us. We climbed slowly, far too slowly, while emergency lamps along the tunnel blinked in uneven sequence. Each light left a strobing afterimage of Vance kneeling at the rear with his rifle set. Halfway up, the lights died. Moonlight from the hatch above became our only illumination, a pale square growing little by little. Then the knocking came from under the tram floor. I looked down. Something pale and narrow was working between the grated panels from the machinery gap below, fingers flattening impossibly thin, then reinflating after they passed through. Vance saw it, drew his knife, and drove the blade through the hand. Black fluid spattered his sleeve. The fingers withdrew. For 2 seconds. Then a head pushed up through the grate. Not through an opening. Through the metal itself, as if the structure of its body could forget solidity whenever necessary. Vertical eyes reflecting moonlight. Mouth seams opening on a smell like deep water and rot. I stamped on it with both boots. The skull gave like wet wood and reformed under my heel. Vance struck it with the butt of his rifle, then jammed a burning flare into its face. It screamed and dropped back into the drive housing, where it began ripping the motor apart with frantic metallic shrieks. The tram slowed. Above us, silhouetted at the hatch, I saw surface soldiers taking positions. Rifles aimed down. Not to cover us. To stop whatever followed. Vance saw it too. Rows burying the ramp. Demolition cord glinted along the upper wall in the moonlight. Charges had been set. They had always intended to collapse the incline if anything from below reached this point. The swarm appeared in the darkness behind us. Not dozens now. Maybe 7 or 8 survivors. But organized. Fast. Some on walls. Some on ceiling supports. One in the center walking upright with Lieutenant Cole's perfect posture, and my face lifted toward us in pity. Mercer. It called in Doc Morrow's voice. Jump. I almost did. That is another truth. Near the end, exhaustion blurs disbelief. The familiar becomes seductive. A known voice sounds safer than your own thoughts. Vance made the decision for both of us. He pulled a coupling pin between the motor sled and the rear cart he was riding. The cart dropped back a foot, then another, beginning to roll down the grade toward the approaching shapes. "What are you doing?" He looked up at me with a steadiness I have never seen in any other man. "Buying time." "No." His smile was tired, almost kind. "Do not let it reach the sun." Then he kicked the rear cart away completely. Gravity took him down toward them. He opened fire as he rolled back into the swarm, muzzle flashes bursting around his silhouette in the dark. Creatures leaped onto the cart and were thrown off. One climbed over the stretcher frame, and he shot it through the mouth. Another reached him from the wall, and he drove the flare into its chest like a spear. The upper charges blew. Stone and dust thundered through the tunnel behind me. The shock wave slammed the motor sled forward the last 20 feet. I hit gravel under the hatch, rolled into night air, and hands grabbed me from every direction. Soldiers in masks dragged me clear as the incline collapsed in a roaring cloud of rock and sparks. The last thing I heard from inside before the tunnel sealed was not screaming. Not Vance's rifle. 3 slow knocks from very deep below, louder than artillery, as if something impossible had simply moved one finger against the underside of the world. I woke in a surface infirmary restrained to a cot. Row was there. 2 doctors. One major from intelligence whose name I was never given. They questioned me for hours, then days. They changed phrases to see if my answers changed with them. Did any entity breach the surface? Did I make direct skin contact? Did Dr. Ward disclose primary asset classification? Did Lieutenant Cole issue unauthorized detonation orders? Did Sergeant Vance exhibit mimic contamination before separation? Did I hear post-incident auditory anomalies? That last one mattered most to them. I told them the truth. Yes. I heard them after. At first it was subtle. Knuckles on the far side of walls during sedation checks. The tap of a pen on the table in sets of 3. A heel clicking down the hall outside my room, always 3 beats. Pause, 3 beats again. Once, while a doctor inspected my pupils, I saw my own reflection in his glasses open its mouth half a second before I did. They moved me twice because I would not stop shouting at the walls. On the third day, I was led past a reinforced observation window overlooking the shaft hangar. Bulldozers, cement mixers, and cranes filled the space. Row and a row of officials in suits watched while truck after truck poured rubble into the elevator shaft.
They were sealing it.
Or pretending to. Because as I watched, one of the workers on the catwalk froze, turned toward the filled opening, and slowly raised his gloved hand. He tapped the rail in front of him 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. No one around him reacted. Maybe they did not hear it. Maybe by then, I was the only one listening for the pattern. The official report that exists in government storage says a geothermal event and chemical leak caused mass hallucinations, structural failure, and fatalities among a mixed military-civilian crew. It says no extraordinary biological materials were recovered. It says the site was permanently decommissioned. It says I suffered acute sensory trauma and fragmented memory under stress. Those statements are neat enough for archives. They are not true, because things continued after the burial. In 1989, a survey helicopter vanished over restricted airspace west of the old site. No wreckage found. In 1991, a ranch family reported hearing knocking under a dry stock tank after midnight for 3 nights straight, then found all their cattle facing the same patch of ground at dawn, ears bleeding. In 1998, a maintenance worker in Albuquerque swore an unoccupied hospital room kept calling the nurse's station from its wall phone. When staff entered, the bed was empty, but the receiver was warm and 3 long scratches had been cut into the metal bedrail. I learned not to dismiss those stories. I also learned that the pattern spreads farther than geography should allow. I retired early, moved east, took jobs with no basements. Never slept in interior rooms, if I could help it. Never answered an unfamiliar voice through static. Never looked too long at reflections in dark windows after sunset. It did not matter. Last winter, decades after New Mexico, I woke at 0217 to a sound inside the wall beside my bed. 3 slow knocks. Not pipes. Not branches. Not settling timber. The rhythm came from shoulder height, from the empty space beyond the plaster where no person could stand. The room was freezing. My breath fogged above the blanket. A smell of wet pennies and old rain filled the dark. I did not move. I did not speak. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Then my dead mother's voice, soft as I remembered from childhood storms. Nathan, open this. There are parts of you that stay 5 years old forever. I felt them all wake at once. The need to answer. The need to help. The need to believe that love can return exactly as it left. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood and stayed still until dawn. When the sun came up, I cut the wall open myself. There was nothing inside. No animal. No pipe. No hidden cavity. Only insulation, dust, and 3 narrow indentations pressed deep into the inner stud from the other side of the wood, as if long fingers had tested the barrier and then withdrawn. So now I am saying this for whoever hears it next. If a voice calls to you from behind a sealed door, from a dead radio, from under a floor that should contain only dirt, do not answer it. If someone you love appears where you know they cannot be, do not let relief decide for you. If a government man tells you a buried place is geological, routine, harmless, and there are no records before 1948, leave before nightfall. And if you ever find 3 vertical marks cut into concrete, metal, wood, or skin, understand that they are not decoration and not madness. They are a count, not of days, not of deaths, of attempts. Because after all these years, after every lie, every burial, every sealed file, I no longer believe the mimics under New Mexico were trying to escape their cells. I think they were trying to keep the last door closed. The image that returns to me most often is not Ramirez dying in the corridor, not Cole dropping with my own false face standing over him, not Vance rolling back into darkness under muzzle flash like a man choosing his own grave. It is that moment in the shattered lower chamber when the ancient ring broke and something below rose just enough for me to see those enormous pale impressions spread across the black surface beneath it like fingertips feeling for a seam. Feeling upward. Feeling outward. Feeling for us. Some nights I wake before the knocking begins. The room is already cold. The ceiling above my bed has a shallow bulge in it, as if something heavy is resting on the other side of plaster that should only face an empty attic. Then 3 long shapes press down through the white paint from above, slow and deliberate, until the surface creaks under their weight. And the whole house waits to hear whether I answer.